The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Mary of Magdala stayed outside the tomb, weeping. And as she wept, she bent over into the tomb and saw two angels in white sitting there, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They've taken my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him." When she said this, she turned round and saw Jesus there, but she did not know that it was he. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" She thought it was the gardener and said to him, "Sir, if you carried him away, tell me where you laid him, and I will take him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, because I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I am going to my Father and to your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary of Magdala went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them what he had told her. The gospel inspired by God. (1893) was a very important and a very interesting year in the life of Chicago. It was also a very interesting year in the life of America, and in fact it was a very interesting year in the life of planet Earth. 1893 was the great World Fair in Chicago. But there was a lot of other stuff happening around in Chicago at the very, very same time, including 3 years beforehand, the first serial killer in American history, a guy called Herman Mudgett, who went under the alias of H.H. Holmes. He was a medical doctor who spent 3 years building what became known subsequently as the Torture Hotel in Chicago, where he had secret rooms and passageways, and over the course of the World Fair, he killed 27 people. Now, they reckon there was a lot more, in fact. There's estimates that he may have killed up to 200 people, but he confessed to 27 murders. At the very same time that this torture and mayhem was happening, there was another great meeting happening in Chicago as well, and it was the first World Parliament of Religions. It was the first time ever that the great traditions from East and West came together. You had a famous character from India called Vivekananda who attended that meeting. You had a very famous Zen Buddhist teacher who attended this meeting. And you had theologians from all over the world for the first time ever coming together and talking about spirituality as a world community. And there was a very interesting debate at that particular meeting between two European theologians. And they're debating whether or not, in order to become deeply spiritual, you have to focus on one religious tradition and then dig in really, really deeply. And one guy was of the opinion that if you take any tradition and you dig down deeply beyond the scriptural tradition and beyond just the dogmatic assertions and beyond the liturgies of it and go way, way, way down, deep, 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 you've come to the place from which all religions emerge. And so you only need one religion if you go down deeply enough. That was his opinion. Another guy had a different opinion, an English theologian, and he quoted an English proverb which says, he knows not England, who only England knows. And his thesis was that you can't know the place you grew up in unless you've gone someplace else, because you have nothing with which to compare it. And so his belief system was, if you really want to become a spiritual person, you have to cross-fertilize and cross-pollinate between all the world religions. And what you find they have in common, that's the real deal. Now, I think it's a combination of both, personally, but I think this is equally true of the feast we're celebrating today. We're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, and I want to talk about what the resurrection might mean and what the body of Jesus might mean. And I'm going to start off by saying that my belief system is that we cannot fully appreciate the physical universe in which we find ourselves unless we have the ability to travel into other dimensions. He knows not England, who only England knows. He knows not the physical universe, who only the physical universe knows. In fact, you can't know your essence until you temporarily separate from it or dim it. And that is the whole purpose of incarnation. The whole point of God spinning off and manifesting all life forms was so that that which separates itself from source goes back to source and appreciates source properly for the first time. It's like the great poet, the poem of T.S. Eliot. We go back, and the end of all our searching is to go back where we began and discover and recognize the place for the first time. So we know not our physical universe until we've had the courage to travel in other universes, to shift our frequencies, in other words. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to make 4 points this morning. And the first point is one I actually made last night. I'm going to revisit one of the points I made in last night's homily. And I called it channel surfing. And the second point I'll talk about, I call it body building. And the third one I will call clashing cosmologies. And then fourthly, I'm going to talk about heavens and hells in order to try to understand what the resurrection of Jesus might be about. So channel surfing. I said last night, and I've shared this at the retreat, as a small child growing up in Ireland in the mid and late 1940s, there was pretty much just about one radio per village at that stage in Ireland. There were big chunky affairs with huge big batteries, and they were real crackly, and there was a lot of static, and we could only get 3 channels at that stage. We could get Radio Éireann, which was the Irish Broadcasting Authority, and if you lived on the east coast of Ireland, you could get BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and sometimes you could get one from Europe called Radio Luxembourg. But as you're twirling the knob trying to fine-tune this, there's all this crackling and all this noise and all this static. So it's really, really difficult to fine-tune it. Now, the truth is, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of radio stations broadcasting out there, but we didn't have the equipment to access those. We were really lucky if we could Radio Éireann clearly. And we'd be listening to matches on Sundays, hurling and football matches, and there would be, the commentator would be telling us about the great deeds of our heroes from County Cork, and the radio would go dead and they'd be cracking, we'd be shouting at it and cursing at it. And so it was very difficult to actually hear with any kind of clarity. Now the equipment is much better, obviously. But there were literally hundreds of these stations broadcasting, but we had access only to 3. But at least we had 3. And so I'm going to suggest this morning that different kinds of cosmologies have 1 dimension or 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions, and that they're really confined. So I'll begin with scientism, materialistic reductionistic science. That science, which is not real science, that claims that nothing is real unless our sensorium can deliver to us or our cognitive processes, can work with it. So nothing is real unless we can taste it or touch it or see it or hear it, either directly by our senses or by extension through our instrumentation. That's the dumbest approach of all. There are people with only 1 channel on their radio. It's channel physicality. And they think that nothing else is real. So you tell them, how about what happens when you're dreaming? Oh, that's just mishigas that happens in the middle of the night. Or what happens, when you're meditating? Oh, that's just made up. That's what kids do. So that's just all white noise in the background. There's only 1 station. And anything else, if you think there are patterns in the noise, it's just listening to your fridge and think that your fridge is saying, come and eat, come and eat, come and eat, come and eat, come and eat. Or like you're listening to a train and the train has come, let's go to Dublin, let's go to Dublin, let's go to Dublin, let's go to Dublin. So that you're imposing patterns on just noise. That would be their claim. So they have only 1 station. The Egyptians at least had 2 stations. The Egyptians called one Ka and the other Ba. One was the physical universe and the other was the metaphysical universe that lay behind the physical appearances. So if you were in ancient Egypt, you had 2 channels available to you. If you were Greek, you had 3 channels available to you. And so the Greeks had 3 different words for body because they understood body in very different ways. We only have 1 word for it in our language, so it's really impoverished. So the Greeks had 3 words. They had sarx, soma, and pneuma. So sarx was the physical flesh and blood body, soma is the psychic body, and pneuma is the spirit body. And so in the Greek writings, they'll differentiate between these 3 different levels of body. And so when St. Paul is writing, for instance, about either Eucharist or about the resurrection of Jesus, he's very, very careful to pick the correct word for body. So he says very definitely in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where he's talking about the Eucharist, he said, on the night that he died, Jesus Christ took bread and said, this is my body. And then Paul goes on and says, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. So the body that Jesus was talking about was not his physical body. Paul is saying it was not sarx. Sarx cannot inhabit the kingdom of God. This flesh and blood stuff cannot inhabit the kingdom of God. And so we know that when we take communion, for instance, it's not that one of you is going to get Jesus' kidney and the other guy is going to get his big toe. We're not eating his physical body. So we're not eating sarx. Sarx can do nothing. So we're talking either about soma or about pneuma. When Paul gets to chapter 15 of his first letter to the Corinthians, and he's talking about resurrection, he says the very same thing. He says, that which is put into the ground, when you set a seed, there's almost no similarity in appearance between what you put in the ground and what comes out of the ground. If you'd never seen an apple tree in your life, and you've never seen an apple, and you've never seen a seed of an apple, and I showed you a tiny little seed in the palm of my hand, and I showed you this tree outside the door, and I said to you, is there a connection between these two things? They look totally different. There is no way you could infer from this tiny little thing here that this would emerge from it. And so Paul is saying what's planted in the ground, what comes out, are totally different. You plant sarx, it is not sarx that rises. You plant the flesh, it is not the flesh that rises. It is soma or it is pneuma. It is a totally different level of body. So at least the Greeks had 3 channels available to them. The Hindus had 7 channels available to them. According to Hinduism, the body has 7 totally different levels, 7 different kinds of bodies, all vibrating at different frequencies. So at the densest frequency, between 400 and 700 nanometers, there's this physical body of ours. They call it the gross body. So there's this physical body of ours. Beyond that, vibrating at a higher level, they talk about the etheric body. It's what the aura looks like. Or if you see pictures of saints, they got halos. This is the energy body that surrounds them. It's vibrating at a higher frequency, which most of us can't see. There's a third level of body that they call the astral body. And it's the body you inhabit when you dream or when you have out-of-body experiences like Peter here. So it's a third level of body that you access. There's a fourth level of body called the mental body. It's like Plato's ideal realm, the place from which we download ratiocination and great ideas. There's a fifth level of body they talk about. It's the level at which we experience ourselves as psychic entities. It's the level at which we may experience, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, telepathy, precognition, psychokinesis, all these things. It's just another level of who we are. The sixth level they would call Atman, the individual soul. And the seventh level they would call Brahma, which is kind of cosmic consciousness. So the Hindus had 7 channels available to them. Now, I think even Hinduism is a radical simplification of what the truth actually is. The truth is there's a multiplicity of dimensions and frequencies out there. And if we have the courage and the know-how how to turn the dial, we can access any of these dimensions. And that is the difference between the avatars in the world and the rest of us, between the Jesus and the Buddha figures and the rest of us. The avatar is the person who can go through all of the frequencies, access all of the frequencies, and report back from all of the frequencies. And that's the great place of imagination. I was talking about this last night as well. That imagination is not the faculty that allows us to make up stuff which isn't real. That is not imagination. Imagination, I keep saying, is the single most important attribute of an artist or a musician or a scientist. It's what leads to great discoveries. Because imagination is the ability to alter my state of consciousness, to shift my frequency, to move into another dimension, to perceive other entities and other energies, to interact with them, to take the information and the experience back into this reality, cross-fertilize it with my own culture, and therefore shift my model of reality. So this is what dialing looks like. And this is what the avatars do. The avatars are fluent in all of these languages, in all of these frequencies. And this is the invitation to all of us, to have the courage to move beyond the frequency of just earthbound physicality and experience the other levels. And it's at the other levels we're going to experience the Jesus figures. You have to move into those levels to understand and experience, for instance, what Eucharist is. If you can't move into that dimension, all you're doing is you're coming up here and you're getting a piece of bread, which is a symbol of something that happened 2,000 years ago in a little room in Jerusalem. If you can change your frequency, you're there. You're having a real encounter with the real Jesus at a different vibratory level. It is a real encounter. That's my first point then. Second point then I'm going to call body building. We have this notion that somehow the resurrection of Jesus consisted in him reassembling his molecular structure pulling in the carbon and the hydrogen and the oxygen and the nitrogen, reassembling it into his physical form and walking out of the tomb and being recognized. Now, it's interesting to me that he wasn't recognized. Even people who knew him, Mary didn't recognize him in this story. The two disciples on the road to Emmaus did not recognize him when they met him because he's not actually in physical space. He's in the next level up. He's at the etheric level. And people who have out-of-body experiences report that the next level up looks very, very like our physical world, but it's not identical. There are tiny little differences. And the tiny little differences are enough to throw people. So Mary did not recognize him. The two disciples on the road to Emmaus did not recognize him because he had shifted frequencies slightly. And in order to have an experience of Jesus, you had to shift your frequency. So there are people who are looking at the same place and not seeing him. I mentioned last night, for instance, that in the great Marian apparitions, like for instance in Fatima in 1917, originally there were just 3 children who saw the Virgin. That was in May 13, 1917. The month after, in June, there were 50 people present. The next month, July, there were 1,800 people present. The next month, there were 4,000. The 5th month, there were 30,000. And the 6th month, there were 70,000 people present. But none of them saw the Virgin, except the children. Because the crowd were locked in earth frequency, and the kids had accessed the next frequency up. And so they could see her. So it's not about bodybuilding, it's not about Jesus reassembling his molecular structure. In the course of the hour and a half or 2 hours we will spend here, we will literally exchange millions of molecules of matter with each other as we breathe in and we breathe out. The you that walks out of Mass, in an hour's time is not the you that walked in here. Molecularly speaking, you are a totally different person. At the end of 7 years, there's not a single molecule of matter in your physical frame that was there 7 years ago. So which body are you going to resurrect? And which body did Jesus resurrect? Statistically speaking, there's a good probability that there's somebody in this room right now who has molecules that once belonged to Genghis Khan, or to Mahatma Gandhi, or to Mother Teresa, or Padre Pio, or anybody you choose to mention, because there's a limited number of molecules on the planet. It's a huge number, but it is limited. We keep recycling it. So on the last day, there's going to be hell to pay, and I said to Judge, that's my kidney. I had that kidney first. I want it back. How am I going to go to heaven without a kidney? So it's not about reassembling this stuff. Thinking that Jesus just reassembled his physical structure is like thinking that I can only be who I was if I wear the same clothes all the time. So if I change my clothes somehow, I'm not the same person. If I change my molecular structure, I'm not the same person. It doesn't make any sense. We use different clothes for different kinds of things. If you want to go swimming, you need a bathing trunks. If you want to play football, wear a helmet and padding. You got to go into bed, wear a nightie or a pajamas. So depending on what you're doing, you're going to need different clothes. So depending on what level you want to access, you got to wear different kinds of clothes. So bodybuilding, it is not about Jesus reassembling the molecules of his matter and coming back out of the tomb and appearing in full physicality in a way that people could recognize him. Only those who could shift their consciousness a little bit. Only those got to see him and recognize him. And they saw him in various places. Most frequently, they saw him in Eucharist, because a Eucharistic celebration, if we know how to engage with it, is a radical shift in frequency and in consciousness. And when we make that shift, what we celebrate here every Sunday is not a memorial of an event that happened 2,000 years ago in an upper room in Jerusalem. We are really engaging with the very same event right now. We're having an encounter with the risen Lord, but it's happening at a slightly different frequency, and so you relate to it in a slightly different way. So bodybuilding is not about Jesus taking his stuff back. That's my second point. The third point, I call it clashing cosmologies. Most of us have been brought up with a very simplistic cosmology, even if we were raised religiously. Basically what it looks like is this. Most of us think that there's only one universe, and it's a physical universe. And in this entire universe, which consists of about 150 billion galaxies, and each galaxy consists of about 150 billion solar systems, that somehow in that entire physical universe, which is all that exists, we believe, God only created life on one planet, and it's our planet, planet Earth. And so there's only one universe, it's a physical universe. Only on one tiny planet did God create life. And on this planet, which has millions and millions of species of life, God only gave one species a soul, and that's us. So now we got one universe, it's a physical universe, there's only life on one planet in this universe, and only one species on this planet has a soul. And each member of this species only gets one shot at life. This is what most of us are brought up. We get one shot at life, and then we die. And then God resurrects our physical bodies. He reassembles all the molecules of our stuff. We take back my kidney from Jojo, and she had to do with the kidney she had before she borrowed 9. And then we all step in front of God, in front of the judgment throne. And then God reads out from the book, and he says, bad boy or bad girl or whatever, or good girl, good boy, whatever. And you get the thumbs up or you get the thumbs down. If you get the thumbs up, you're given a song sheet and a harp. And some wings. Okay, some get wings. And you sit around in big concentric circles, and God is in the middle, and God has a real poor self-image. So he needs to be told constantly how good he is. So we're singing, playing our harps and whatever from the song sheet. The other guys are gone down, and they're being toasted down below. Now, every so often, there's an intermission. There's a musical intermission, and we put our harps aside, and we go over, we look over the balcony, down looking at the guys who are getting toasted. And that's part of the joy of heaven, according to Christian teaching. Literally. That during the intermissions, you get to look down and appreciate, what's the term in German for Schadenfreude? Schadenfreude, where you take great pleasure in the discomfort of others. So we're looking down and enjoying this. That's the theology and that's the cosmology that most of us are brought up with. No, nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is more like this. The truth is that there's a multiplicity of universes. There are universes and metaverses. And many, many of these universes are not physical universes at all. That they exist in many, many, many different dimensions and many, many different frequencies. And all of these are teeming with life. Some of it is non-physical life, and some of it is physical life. And every part of that is equally precious to God. For God, our mother, she is no more loving toward an avatar than she is to a banana slug. Each of them are equally precious to her. Everything that exists is equally precious to God. Earthlings are no more important than extraterrestrials as far as God is concerned. Sea anemones, have a soul just as much as sages have souls. Everything that exists in these physical and non-physical universes of ours, they're all ensouled. They're all vibrating with the energy of God. And there isn't a last judgment where we stand in front of the throne and God, like a kind of a cosmic CPA, calls out the score and gives you a passing grade or a failing grade. It's not like that at all. Rather, it is at the end of each incarnation, there is a self-evaluation where with a mentor who prepared you for this particular lifetime, you figure out which lessons did I learn and which ones did I yet not learn so that I may go back, and do a better job on it the next time. And so it becomes very important for us to shift our cosmologies. If we're stuck in that old cosmology, the resurrection of Jesus means something totally different from us. Resurrection is about fine-tuning the frequencies. It is not about reassembling molecular structure. And it's about fine-tuning our cosmologies. It's not kind of, having an us and a them is saved and a damned kind of mentality. Which brings me to my fourth point. I call it heavens and hells. These dimensions exist in various levels of density. And the more dense a dimension is, and the less subtle it is, the less effective thoughts are. So in the subtler realms, these realms are very, very thought sensitive. To think something is to actually create it. The denser it becomes, and as you dial down the frequency, it becomes more and more difficult to translate thoughts into actual physical objects. We still manage to do it. But it takes a lot more work. And so, for instance, everything that, in this room was a thought form at some stage. This bench here was a thought in somebody's mind. They created a blueprint in their mind, and then they got the materials, and then they fashioned it. A school bus was originally a thought form. Capitalism originally was a thought form. So everything that we surround ourselves and that we see around us in the physical universe originally was a thought form. But it took a lot of minds going back to the same notion continually with great focus and great intentionality to shift it from an etheric blueprint form into a physical form. And that's the origin of all cultures. All cultures come about because a group of people come together and slowly by slowly they decide that such and such a thing could be real. And they create it. They make it real. They make it a physical reality by going back to it sufficiently often with great intensity in greater numbers. So every culture is the result of thought forms. Every religion is the result of thought forms. Things that started off as thoughts finally work their way and they become cultures, or they become religions, or they become science. So everything starts off as a thought form. But the denser the dimension we're in, the less sensitive, the dimension is to thought. It takes a lot more thought from a lot more people with a lot more intensity to actually have an effect. As we move through the subtler realms, to think is to actually create. And every one of you experiences this every night. When you're dreaming, it is your thoughts that create the dream. But when you're in the dream, it is totally real. You are unaware completely of the physical dimension when you're dreaming. And every thought you have, you created the dream. You produced it, you directed it, you fashioned the costumes, you chose the locations, you crafted the script and the plot, and you acted all of the parts. You created amnesia for that fact, and you thought you were just the dream ego. But you created every element of it, and it was your thoughts that did that. So the more sensitive the realm is, the more malleable they are to thought form. Now that's equally true when we come to the notion of heaven and hell. Heaven and hell have been created through thought forms. So when you get a sufficient group of people, in the case of the great monotheistic religions, literally millions and millions and millions of people over hundreds and hundreds of years, they fashion their notions of heaven or hell, and they become then consensual realities. And they become the experience that people have when they transition. Having had the privilege of accompanying many, many people in the dying process, what I've seen is people die the way they live. And people transition the way they die. And people encounter the afterlife the way in which they've transitioned, initially at least. And so whatever consensual thought form you've created through your religious belief system, whatever group you grew up in, that's what you're ready for. That's the frequency at which you're vibrating when you cross over. And that's all you can encounter. You cannot encounter a different frequency from that which you hold as your core vibratory level. So it becomes really, really important for us. The notions of heaven and hell that you have right now, is that what you want to encounter when you go on? Is heaven having 72 virgins? Great fun for the guys. What about the 72 virgins? Is it about great food? Is it about meeting dead loved ones? So what version of after feels like heaven to you? Because that to which you give credence and that to which you give energy is that which you will experience. Now, I totally believe that at some stage in the process, everybody on the other side begins to realize that they've boxed themselves in. That their notion of heaven, no matter how nice it may be and how good it may feel, it's still, it's confined and it is limited. And then the explorers will begin to think outside the box, and they'll be able to create thought forms of different levels of heaven. And once they do that, they can begin to access it. So it's heavens all the way up. So when Paul said famously, "Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man what things God has prepared for those who love him," Paul is not talking about an afterlife. He's talking about an inner life. He's talking about the ability to shift frequencies, and it doesn't matter what dimension you're in when you start. It doesn't matter what you're in physicality or you've shuffled off this mortal coil. It is your ability to dial the frequency up that allows you to access more and more the extraordinary possibilities that eye has not yet seen, nor ear heard, nor has it yet entered into the heart of man. And this is the message of Jesus. I used an image last night of going up on an elevator. Jesus came down only to level 2, the level at which his etheric body could be visible to those who could shift their energy up the floor to. But now Jesus hit the top button, and he's on his way back up to source, union with source. The top of the skyscraper and the ultimate heaven is where we realize that all of this has been a game. It's been a beautiful game. Sometimes it's been a difficult game, other times, but it's been a game. And the game was, he knows not England, who only England knows. He knows not source, who only source knows. And that is why God decided to play the game of hide and go seek with herself. And as the game begins to fall back in, our job as created beings is to get rid one by one of the illusions that separate us from source. So we take the elevator back up, we dial up the knob, we experience frequencies and vibratory rates where we now encounter different energies and different entities. And as we make our way back up, finally we come to the realization that it's all been a fascinating game, but even a soul is illusion. The soul is the first illusion on the way out, and the soul is the last illusion on the way back in. Because the truth is, there is only God.